Is unemployment manufactured? Why we need a federal job guarantee. In a country that has a net worth of at least $269.6 trillion, there is just no moral excuse for poverty. Yet more than 45 million people live at or below poverty levels, and this is a conservative estimate. So how can we fix this problem? There are many answers to this question, but one of the most practical and easiest to implement may be the federal job guarantee. Is unemployment manufactured? We know that it benefits companies to have a huddled mass of impoverished workers waiting in desperation for a job. It makes it very easy for employers to offer low wages, inhuman working conditions, and limited or no benefits. There is no need to look further than your local McDonald's for a manager who at this very moment is echoing the same threat that Depression-era Doc foreman levied at their crowd of potential workers. You don't like the pay? The conditions? Then there are 10 more of you who will. I can replace you right now. It's no secret who benefits from unemployment. What is a federal job guarantee? The federal government offers a living wage job to every worker, guaranteed. Simple enough, but how would it work?
So the federal job guarantee is a federal right, a right to a job, so that no matter what, you can always have a job. You can always have a job with benefits, with a living wage, and it's intended to be a counter-cyclical job guarantee that allows for when the business cycle lays people off, instead of having a bunch of unemployed people, you have people that are able to work in their community. And it's just an incredible thing because it's federally funded and locally administered.
How can this help to solve poverty?
So the federal government buys all the surplus food to keep the price from dropping to zero. And the government would then release it into the economy when there's a shortage or there's a drought or something like that. So we use these commodity buffer stocks to stabilize the price of corn because it's a major input into a lot of the...
Yeah, why can't we do that with labor?
Exactly. Thank you.
How can we be sure it will work? Let's go back to that famous depression in the 1930s. Activists rallied to demand that Franklin Delano Roosevelt institute the New Deal.
It took over a quarter of our country being out of work during the Great Depression, starving, standing in bread lines, and thousands marching in the streets for our country to do something substantial for working people. In 1933, the National Industrial Recovery Act, or NIRA, was passed, which recognized the right to organize and launched the PWA, which was followed by the WPA. The right to organize, combined with a federal jobs program, albeit temporary, created the conditions necessary for workers to organize en masse. And in 1934, over 1.4 million workers were involved in strike actions. A mass labor movement was forming, creating a power base for FDR and the New Deal Democrats to pass the kind of bold legislation that made the post-war period the most prosperous in our nation's history, with the lowest levels of income inequality we've seen since we've begun measuring them in 1915, which lasted until the 1980s. And so the growth of the labor movement and the successes of the WPA led to bolder visions, in particular a vision for a future in which one's ability to make a living wasn't dependent upon the manipulations of the market by a few.
Today, the economic conditions have not improved. Indeed, they have worsened. We are a country sliding backward, and we need real solutions now.
But there's some truth to this statement of send me your poor, but not the truth we wish to believe or hope to be true. We do want their poor, and we do want their tired, but not so they can find better lives for themselves or their families in the pursuit of happiness, but to exploit their working class struggle in the pursuit of corporate profits.
Do you support Medicare for all?
Yeah!
Do you support a Green New Deal?
Yeah!
Do you support getting money out of politics?
Yeah!
Rick Larson supports none of those things. He's seeking a 10th term so he can continue to support the industries and policies that are stealing our labor, killing our economy, and destroying our planet. I am here to be part of the progressive wave of candidates running all across the country.
Tonight, we have assembled 6 academics, candidates, activists, and on-the-ground organizers to discuss the specifics of our demand for a federal job guarantee and how we can make it happen. We would like to welcome our panelists. Jason Call is a congressional candidate for Washington's 2nd Congressional District. He has a 30-year history of progressive activism and has served 4 years as an elected representative to the Washington State Democratic Central Committee. Steve Grumbine is founder and head of Real Progressives and Real Progress in Action. He's the host of Macro and Cheese podcast and the podcast and video series The New Untouchables, The Pecora Files. Fadhel Kaboub is president of the Global Institute for Sustainable Prosperity and associate professor of economics at Denison University. He is a widely published author whose research focuses on the political economy of the Middle East and fiscal and monetary policy dimensions of job creation. Eric Kestner is an activist and an organizer with Real Progressives and Yellow Vest Actions for Our Lives. He is now focused on non-electoral solutions and direct actions pushing progressive policies and modern monetary theory. Liz Medina is the executive director of the Vermont State Labor Council, AFL-CIO, host of En Masse podcast, which is part of the Labor Radio Network. She is the previous co-chair of the Goddard College Staff Union, UAW 2322. Andre Walton is the Southeast Regional Organizer for Our Wisconsin Revolution and a political activist for progressive policies. Our hosts tonight are Kiko Gomez, who is with United Left and the host of Ranting of a Geek podcast, and also Bess Godin, media lead for the United Left and host of Millennial Splaining. And of course, welcome to you all, activists in your own right. Without you, nothing we say here matters. So thank you for joining us, and let's get started. Thank you so much, everyone, for joining us. We are very much looking forward to having a conversation about the federal job guarantee. And let's see, I will first introduce myself. My name is Bess Godin, and I am the media lead here at United Left. And I am also the host of Millennial Splaining podcast. My co-host tonight is Kiko Gomez, who is also with United Left, and he is the host of Ranting of a Geek podcast. We are here with congressional candidate and activist Jason Call, Steve Grumbine, podcaster, founder of Real Progressives, Fadhel Kaboub, economics professor and founder of the Global Institute for Sustainable Prosperity, Eric Kestner, Yellow Vest activist and organizer, Liz Medina from the AFL-CIO, and Andre Walton, activist with Our Revolution Wisconsin. So thanks everyone so much for joining us. And the first question we are going to throw out to the crowd. Kiko?
All right. Hi. Hello. I am Kiko Gomez. I am the co-host. Obviously, I look fabulous, don't I? So the first question will be to the general audience at large, including to all the panelists. So the question I'm going to pose to all you is, what are the biggest problems that would be solved by a federal jobs guarantee, and what would be the biggest hurdle to achieving it? So we're going to start with someone who will raise their hands first, and then we'll call on that person. Anyone?
Jason?
Yeah, I'll jump in. I can't find the little hand raise thing on, so I don't know if we're just raising our hand or trying to. Okay. Yeah, I think poverty is the first thing that we end up tackling with the federal jobs guarantee. Bottom line is poverty is violence, and as the introductory video said, we have so much wealth in this country, and in fact, there's so much wealth in the world that there's absolutely no excuse, and we have so many needs that a federal jobs guarantee would fill. So we end up filling our productive capacity and eliminating poverty. I mean, I think that's really where we want to go with this. It's moral and it's just, and it's just the right thing to do. I'll leave it at that.
Eric?
Well, there's just so many people that would be lifted up with a federal jobs guarantees. So many, the unemployed and the poor, of course, people facing low wage jobs, no benefit jobs, and folks that are working jobs now that aren't unemployed, but there's no benefits, or folks that are just working a job so their family can have health care, that would be better off doing something else. you know, workers that have been permanently displaced by COVID, you know, would be helped with a jobs guarantee. Young people entering the jobs market for the first time. You know, the workforce that's going to be phased out of dirty jobs, caretakers, the disabled. So many people would be lifted up by a new base wage, a new wage floor, and you know, even ex-prisoners coming out of the system that need a path back. Federal jobs guarantee could help them. People stuck in abusive relationships that don't think they have an out. I mean, it would help half the population. It's just something we need awfully bad.
Liz?
I want to echo and lift up everything that Eric and Jason just said. But in terms of organized labor, something that's underappreciated but that a federal jobs guarantee could help with is the fact that there are a lot of low wages within organized labor. A lot of the workers that are with the Vermont AFL-CIO in Vermont are, you know, really struggling to make ends meet. And Vermont has some of the most expensive housing in the state. It requires almost $22 an hour to afford a 2-bedroom apartment here. And the wages are some of the lowest in the New England region. So even for organized labor, people who have a job now, a federal jobs guarantee would lift their wages potentially as well by creating a floor for jobs in this country, by bringing in the public sector to create jobs at a prevailing wage or at least a living wage level. And also just all the, you know, speaking to the housing too, you know, the housing stock in Vermont and across the country is quite low. And, you know, there's so much work we need to do to actually provide for people's basic needs. There's not a single person, I don't think, that, you know, this wouldn't help in some major way. And, you know, I think also it would have obviously helped the people who are often most left out of formal employment opportunities. People who are historically discriminated against: women, people of color, people with disabilities, including disabilities that they get on the job. I know I've talked to workers in our local granite industry. Those jobs are actually still very hard on their bodies, and some of them are facing, you know, disability in their 40s and 50s from a life of hard work, and are really scared about what they're going to do next. And, you know, so this is a kind of security, like Social Security, in the form of a job guarantee for everybody.
Great. Fadhel? Sorry.
Yeah, I'd like to echo everything that's been said. This is, it's actually wonderful to be an economist on a panel like this and have very little to add after a few people have, you know, have articulated so well what the job guarantee could do and is capable of doing. I'll just add that, you know, we have tons of studies in the social sciences in this country and beyond showing that every time we have unemployment and underemployment of substantial sizes during recessions and so on, we have increases in depression, anxiety, suicide, family breakdown, child abuse, substance abuse, you name it. All of these hidden costs that are associated with unemployment, hidden forms of unemployment and stressful employment conditions, abusive employment conditions, all of this will be addressed with a job guarantee that pays decent wages and benefits and focuses on the neglected areas of the economy and society: neglected people, neglected communities, neglected environment, neglected individuals such as the elderly and children. So when you tally up the costs, the hidden cost of doing nothing, which is the current status quo, versus what it would cost to implement a very generous, rigorous job guarantee program that really lifts up communities, you realize that we're paying for the cost many times over, not just financially, but as we say, with money, blood, and tears. And that's just, you know, it's a no-brainer that for a country like the United States and other countries as well, that a job guarantee is absolutely necessary to complement what the private sector, what the mainline government sector is unable and unwilling to do. So I'll just leave it at that for now.
Steve and Andre, before you both raised your hand at the same time, if you don't mind, Steve, I'm going to let Andre go first. But I'd also like to hear a little bit more about the biggest hurdle to achieving it. So if you guys are interested in addressing that as well, that would be great.
Yeah, I mean, I think I'll probably let one of you guys address that question. But I would just like to say, growing up in a city called Milwaukee, Wisconsin, which is labeled one of the worst cities for people of color or Black people to grow up in, a jobs guarantee would actually, in my opinion, reduce crime rates. So one of the reasons why crime tends to increase or stay steady in poverty areas like Milwaukee is because there's either lack of job opportunities or jobs that don't pay a fair wage. So people have to make really hard decisions between, are they going to do something unethical in order to supplement low wage costs, or are they going to, work a job, kind of slaving and not making ends meet? And then, it really has kind of a ripple effect, because then if they make those unethical decisions, then they face, jail time, and then we spend more here in Wisconsin on our prison system and education. But having more fair wage jobs in poverty areas would hugely reduce the crime rate, because people don't have to make those unethical decisions or hard decisions between, should I work a terrible job and not make ends meet, or should I do something unethical and actually be able to pay my bills, my rent, my car insurance, and everything that comes along with the cost of living. So I think that would have a huge ripple effect in places like I grew up in Milwaukee, where poverty is pretty bad. And it would also just, help improve the city overall, because right now we spend over 50% of our discretionary budget on policing, and we don't actually see any decrease in actual crime rates. So just having jobs guarantee would kind of nullify that we don't really need a bloated police budget as much, because it's reducing the poverty rate. So it would have a ripple effect in many ways. But that's just one instance that I know would directly impact people, especially in places with high rates of minority populations.
Excellent. Absolutely. All right, Steve, take it away.
So, and thank you all very much for all the great responses so far. For me, I'm going to try and take it a slightly different angle and piggyback on what Bess was trying to get at in terms of the difficulty in implementing one. One of the big things to me is a lack of understanding of how money works, a lack of understanding of where money generates from, a lack of understanding of what the federal government's role is, and a lack of understanding of what the state role is. That's part of it. The next part of it, and this is probably even more important, is understanding that people have given up, many people have given up on the political process, and being able to be engaged and involved, especially those people at the bottom that tend to not vote at all. The federal job guarantee is a democracy enhancer, because it's paid for at the federal government, where big programs like this should be funded from. But at the state, it's administered locally, where people can get involved in their local community, get to know one another. We're in a very digital society, and we were just in a pandemic. People have lost touch with each other. They've lost touch with the community. They've lost touch with what matters. By having a locally administered job guarantee program where people can basically decide what matters to their community, this is a true democracy enhancer, engaging people, showing up at the town hall to talk about what jobs they want to fund or whatever. I think there's an incredible upside here in terms of getting people involved once again. We no longer have a union floor like we used to back in Eugene V. Debs' era. We have to find a way to recreate the commons where people can get together and talk about these things. There's no more Jacobin Club. There's none of that stuff. So for us, the opportunity to organize at a local level will be tremendously enhanced by having a federal job guarantee that is local to the people. It also, on a very important but small side note, impacts our carbon footprint by limiting mobility travel back and forth. You have people that are working in their communities, working from home even possibly, spending more time with their families, giving them an opportunity to have a better work-life balance. And I think one of the most important things that we have to fight for right now, unfortunately, is the conflation between a UBI and a job guarantee. People think that they're in opposition to one another. The UBI has its own reasons to not support it or support it. The job guarantee supports something very different. It supports ending forced unemployment, and it provides a net infusion of cash into the economy as the ebbs and flows of the regular business cycle take place. So while we have Social Security in this country, and we have it for survivor benefits, we have it for disability, we have it for retirement, we can expand Social Security to meet any conditions that we want to meet. So we already have a basic income set aside. We just have to expand it, as many candidates wanted to do in previous elections. There are opportunities there. My hope is that we'll focus going forward as a movement on making sure that the federal job guarantee is instituted. It's probably the most important thing in terms of a Marshall mobilization, a Marshall Plan type mobilization, given our climate crisis.
Excellent. So we do need to move on, but I want to give you a second, Jason, to address this if you want to.
Yeah, and I saw Liz's hand go up also, so maybe we'll we'll have something to say.
Quick
here about
seconds
this.
for both.
I think the Steve gave a good sort of really deep answer, because it's a very all-encompassing thing. But the very direct answer is that the economic royalists in this country don't want a federal jobs guarantee. Artificial scarcity always benefits the already wealthy. And I think, as I just say this as a political candidate, we know how much our political system is bought off by the ownership class, by the billionaires. And that's really where it starts. And so, when we talk about what is the major impediment, it's just that the billionaire class likes a captive population, and that's what they've got here. When you have unemployment, and you have, as the very good opening video said, you've got people fighting for a job where a boss can turn around and say, well, if you're not going to do this work for the pay I'm offering, that guy over there will. We look at our trade policy, and we look at global free trade policy. It's the same thing country to country that we have here with employment. We got somebody in Malaysia won't do the work anymore for 9 cents an hour. Okay, well, somebody in Bangladesh will, and so we'll take it there. And that's what we've got going on in this country. So we have to get money out of politics. If we can't limit the influence of the billionaire class on the very imbalanced influence of the billionaire class on our political system, we're going to have a very hard time passing this, because that is the number one impediment.
Excellent point. Liz?
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. The billionaire class is the main obstacle, Jason. And the only way, I think from a movement perspective, to make them fearful enough to do something, even if we can't get money out of politics right away, is to create a movement that will make the alternative of a jobs guarantee seem much better than their alternative of a revolution, potentially. That's essentially the conditions that were in place for the New Deal. FDR didn't come in as a radical. He didn't come in as someone like Bernie Sanders at all. He came into a revolutionary situation and historical juncture at which there were millions and millions of people unemployed. The CIO was forming, and a new industrial unionism that was organizing the masses of the working class, and also the Communist Party and Socialist Party organizing the unemployed in a way that really scared the pants off of the billionaire or maybe millionaire class at the time. And so I think it's important to remember that no matter who we get in office, at the end of the day, there has to be the people power there to compel them to do what we want. And we do want a federal jobs guarantee. We need that.
Okay. Eric, did I see your hand raised?
No, I was just
okay.
The revolutionary fist about business.
Yes, love it.
The movement needs to move into the streets.
Absolutely. Great. Well, before we get into the streets, let's ask Steve and Fadhel a question. I'd like to know a little bit more about the buffer stock theory that Fadhel, you were talking about in the video, and how it would affect a minimum wage, a federal minimum wage?
Very good question. Well, the buffer stock mechanism is actually a fancy term for a mechanism that all countries around the world use on a regular basis to stabilize prices of key commodities, typically things like corn and wheat, and if you're Brazil, it will be coffee, basic commodities that we believe are extremely important for price stability across the system. So the federal government would intervene in the market for wheat and corn and cotton or whatever commodities, intervene as a buyer of last resort. So when producers flood the market with corn, the price would normally go down close to zero, and that would bankrupt the producers and ruin the system. So the federal government steps in as a buyer of last resort and takes that surplus corn and stores it away. Some of it is stored for strategic purposes. Some of it is donated to countries that face natural disasters and things like that. But quite a bit of it is stored for a significant amount of time. And the idea here is that to buy all the surplus until you raise the price to a level that's reasonable and profitable enough for farmers so that they continue producing. And then if we have the opposite scenario a few years down the road, when we have a crop failure or a shortage of production that would normally force prices to skyrocket and create food price inflation for consumers, that's when the government steps in as a seller of last resort and starts selling all that surplus to bring down the price to a reasonable level for consumers. So it creates that buffer zone, so that there's a maximum price and a minimum price that the government allows prices to fluctuate in between that buffer. And we do that systematically. So we do it for all major commodities for price stability reasons. And we don't do this for the most important component in the economy, which is labor. We allow the price of labor to go to zero, right? But we don't allow the price of corn or the price of wheat to go to zero. Why? Because the effective minimum wage for people who can't find work is zero, right? The minimum wage is for people who work, but for people who can't find work, the effective wage is zero. So what we're saying is essentially, let's do the same thing that we do across the system, to stabilize prices of things. And we do it to the most valuable thing we have in society, which is human labor. And we're not going to store people in warehouses. We're going to use the surplus labor to spend money and dedicate resources, productive capacity to the most neglected areas of the economy. And the care economy, caring for people, caring for the planet, caring for children, investing in infrastructure, education, so that we have a minimum standard, a minimum wage that becomes then, the job guarantee becomes the effective minimum wage. So if today we pass a minimum wage, a job guarantee legislation that pays $15 an hour plus vacation time, plus benefits, plus childcare, plus that becomes effectively the minimum wage across the board that everybody else has to compete with. So we're not racing to the bottom, we're racing to the top. So now companies that can't compete with $15 an hour plus benefits, they have to either reduce profits at the distribution to their shareholders and CEOs and spend on the people who actually create the profits and make those companies function. Or for some of them will invest in technology that will displace labor, what we call labor displacing technology, and robots and artificial intelligence and all of that. And I want to say one thing here that's very important for us to recognize, that while it at first sight it looks like a threat to workers, all the investments in technology are going to happen anyway. Happen with a job guarantee, without a job guarantee. This is what capitalism does. Capitalism always displaces workers. It started from the beginning of capitalism. So we always displace workers, but the new jobs that are created are always jobs that require higher levels of skills, technical skills, education, experience. And that's what the job guarantee does. It allows people to retain, maintain, and improve their skills, including investment in education. So as far as I'm concerned, if the robots will take over the jobs that are repetitive, that are painful, that are dangerous, that are precarious, let them have it. That's actually a good thing. And then let's create well-paying jobs that are dignified and guaranteed with benefits for people who want to work. And that's why a job guarantee is a critical component of an abusive capitalist system that constantly displaces people and shares profits to the highest income earners, extracts profits to the highest income earners, and leaves the rest of the working class kind of in this situation that we're currently in.
Excellent. Well put. That was very clear. Thank you. Steve, do you have anything to add?
Well, obviously, Fadhel is the master of this subject, and he just laid out the buffer stock very well. I think one of the things that's important to think about is that currently the alternative buffer stock is unemployed people. And that by the buffer stock of employed people being set with a living wage and living benefits and all the other goodies that go with it, you're doing more than just setting the base wage. You're setting the base work requirements, the base working conditions. And so one of the most important things to me in framing that concept of the buffer stock is, people oftentimes don't want to compare life and labor to the term buffer stock. Like that just seems very disconnected. And I've had a bunch of debates about this, but the fact of the matter is that capital disciplines labor all the time and they have nowhere to go. And by doing it without a job guarantee, it drives the wage down even further. And so when the economy picks back up, people are brought back in, as you see with our last major recession, people are brought back in at for wages 20, 30, 40% below what they made prior to the economic incident. So I think something like this maintains the stability of the economy, which is part of that buffer stock, which Fadhel spoke of in terms of the government buys commodities. But I think it's also really super important to understand, though, that this is also, in my mind anyway, and I probably shouldn't say this out loud, but it's an equalizer for labor, because if your boss is doing you wrong, if you're having real problems, without even thinking about it, that as a right, you can pick up and walk out. And it may not be what you were making. It's definitely not intended to be a career wage. Okay. This is setting the floor. But if you need to walk out and you don't want to lose your health benefits, you can step out and you can go into that job. And that is, in my opinion, masterful, possibly the most game-changing aspect of this whole thing. And so as a buffer stock of human beings that are not sitting around laying idle, that don't have resumes to show that I've been doing something productive, this is a big deal. And then go back to Reconstruction, not to go too far back, but if you look at Reconstruction laws and the black codes and all the Jim Crow laws and so forth, what you saw was a situation where vagrancy was used as a tool to put people back in jail, to increase recidivism, to destroy minority communities. So that still goes on. When people are released from prison today, you've got an unemployed prison stock of labor waiting to happen, that instead of funding jobs, it ends up funding cops because they scoop them up and put them back in jail. So to me, this concept of a buffer stock is the most humane thing. And so I want people that might get thrown off by that term to not be thrown off by that term, because the alternative really is literally letting the value and the labor price drop precipitously.
Excellent point. Thank you. Kiko, next question.
Well, that was a brilliant lesson so far. I appreciate it. So this question now is for both Fadhel and Jason. And the question to you, gentlemen, is: can you tell us about the resolution that Ayanna Pressley proposed and the Biden's job plan, and what are the differences between both of those things, and why is it important that the word guarantee is written in the bill?
You can take this one, Fadhel.
Sure. So the job guarantee resolution that Congresswoman Ayanna Pressley released a couple months ago is a resolution. It's not a bill. So it's kind of a statement of principle and aspiration, and it's really meant to engage the general public in discussions like this so that we know what a job guarantee is, what are the pros, what is the opposition to it, so that we can mobilize and pick up the phone and call your congressmen and senators and ask them to endorse the resolution, ask them to draft a bill that will be incorporated and eventually passed into law. The Biden infrastructure plan and all of these job creation programs don't mention the term job guarantee. They allude to the idea that there'll be workers displaced in the fossil fuel industry, so we need to transition them into other jobs. But there's no such thing as a guarantee. There's no mechanism that will be a buffer stock mechanism the way we've described it here. And a buffer stock mechanism, by the way, expands and shrinks. So during bad economic times, when lots and lots of people lose their jobs in the private sector, such as during a transition to a green economy, a lot of fossil fuel workers will be displaced. The size of the job guarantee pool will expand. The buffer stock will expand. But as we begin to transition people into greener industries and better paying jobs in the private sector, the size of the job guarantee pool will shrink. So it acts as this counter-cyclical measure. So I wouldn't say anything in the Biden proposal so far comes close to a job guarantee. It's just, let's create a lot of jobs because we're coming out of a pandemic. We need to build quite a bit of long overdue infrastructure, so we're going to create a lot of jobs. So they see that as the job creation mechanism, but there is no guarantee that those jobs will remain as career jobs once the bridges are built or once the infrastructure is built. The idea is that people will just continue working in the private sector, and when we hit the next recession, they'll be unemployed. So there is no such thing as guarantee under any of the current policy proposals that are actually on the table.
If I can follow up, I'm watching the questions come through the chat, and Ramona Masachi in New Jersey said, "Why did Rep. Presley write a resolution and not just introduce a bill?" And the simple answer is she knows this bill is not going to pass. It's at this point, it's not going to get out of committee. So Fadhel's answer to the previous question about it is really on point there, that it's really an educational piece. I mean, we're introducing it to the public sphere, and we're trying to build some backing behind it and have people understand what it means, so that at the time that it can be introduced as a bill, that there will be enough congressional representation there that would support it. But right now it would just be, it would be dead in the water. So there's almost no point in introducing such a bill.
All right. Excellent. So that kind of brings us really well into our next question, which I'm going to throw out to everyone. So when you have something to say, please just raise your hand. And so what is the best way to achieve a federal job guarantee? Should we, this is a big question, but should we focus our energy on electing candidates who will fight for the guarantee? In the past, we've elected candidates that told us they would fight for certain policies, and it has turned out to be just rhetoric. So should we turn our focus to direct actions instead? I saw Fadhel first.
I saw Andre too. Andre, go ahead. I'll talk afterwards.
Yeah, thanks for that. Yeah, I think coming from an organizer's perspective, every approach has to take a multi-tier approach. You can't put your eggs all in one basket. So let's say we do advocate for very progressive candidates, that's fine. But you also have to keep the pressure on. We have to continue to make phone calls. We have to do marches. We have to make letter campaigns, do education to the populace. So reach out to your peers, friends, family, coworkers, and things like that to let people know exactly what we're advocating for. I think the failure, or I wouldn't call it a complete failure, but the mistake that we made with Justice Democrats per se is that we've kind of let our foot off the gas. Like, we had the thought that if we just get them elected, that's enough. No, we know now, and we should have known always, that's not enough. We have to keep the pressure on and let them know that that the pressure is always going to be on. And I think we also have to keep the threat of the primary alive, because as soon as people start getting comfortable in their office, they really don't even have any incentives to stick to the word that they said they were gonna, they promised and the promises they ran on during their campaigns. So, keeping the threat of losing their job is always that kind of invisible hand or something like that you want to call it, to keep the pressure on. So I think, you have to take every approach that you have at your disposal. Whenever you're putting your eggs in one basket and hoping that's going to be the end all be all, I think that's when we set ourselves up for failure. And I think, kind of going back to what Liz was talking about with FDR, the reason why they won a lot of progressive fights is because they had outside pressure. I mean, they had the Socialist Party, and that scared the heck out of the Democrats. So yeah, I mean, even if we're running third party candidates and siphoning some of those votes away, we got to scare them. And that's what my opinion is.
Excellent. Yeah, I agree. Do we want to let Eric have a go at this one? I'd like to hear your opinion. And then we'll get back to Fadhel and Steve. Is that okay?
Yeah, sure. That's great.
Great.
Well, I think the best way to achieve a jobs guarantee is to first look at what's standing in the way. And Steve and Fadhel can speak better to this, but the way we view our economic system, or in a lot of cases, people that don't view our economic system are resistant to that information for some reason, about questions like how are we going to pay for these ponies, is what they're called, and these things that we want are deemed unreasonable by the establishment and pie in the sky. And I think getting the knowledge out there that these things are attainable, the federal government can pay for them, each and every one of them, a federal jobs guarantee, the Green New Deal, and Medicare for all of these things that we want. I think the barriers are mostly up here, and we need people to understand that a different set of questions need to be asked, not the questions of, well, what program do we have to cut in order to pay for it, or things like that. What we need to ask ourselves is, why are they trying to starve us out? Why are they trying to apparently, seemingly kill us? Because judging by the way a lot of the Democrats and Republicans vote, that seems to be where we're going. And I think Steve or Fadhel would have some more insight on that, on the pay-fors that need to get explained so desperately to so many good people.
Great. Well, let's hear it, Fadhel.
I'm going to echo some of what's been said, which is it's a multi-pronged approach. You have to tackle this from multiple perspectives. You have to run progressive candidates and keep the pressure on people who are in office. You have to educate people in office, engage with them, but also unseat them if necessary. So we have to build a movement that has sharp pitchforks, but well-informed pitchforks too. So mobilize, educate, and empower so that the threat is real, so that we can push back on the objections. And the objections will come from multiple fronts. As Eric said, there's going to be, how are you going to pay for it? And that part, the MMT community has done quite a bit of work to shift the narrative on how do we pay for the job guarantee, Medicare for all, the Green New Deal, and so on. And I'll let Steve, illustrate in a minute. But then there's going to be this other can of worms that many people in office, who, even those who support the job guarantee, are just unable to untangle because of the following. So what's going to happen to small business owners who can't afford to compete with a job guarantee that pays $15 an hour in health benefits and childcare benefits and so on? Well, that now untangles another problem for us, which is how we deliver healthcare in this country, and putting the burden on employees and employers. So that brings in Medicare for all as a key component of this transformative progressive agenda that we have. For me, the big umbrella is the Green New Deal because it includes a job guarantee, it includes Medicare for all. So now if we take the cost of healthcare off of the shoulders of small business owners and employees, you've more than compensated for a decent wage, and you've covered the healthcare part. If we take the burden of college education, if we've taken the burden of childcare, of elderly care off of the pocketbooks of small business owners and working class people, then of course you can afford a decent wage, right? There's also the FICA tax, which is the Social Security tax and all of those taxes. For small businesses, that's significant. For big businesses, it's not a big deal because they have the resources and they're able to extract plenty of profits to pay for those taxes. But from an MMT perspective, we know that you don't need to tax work. You don't need to tax small businesses to create a guaranteed income for the elderly under a social security system. So that becomes too much to untangle for politicians who are trying to slice this question piece by piece and say, let's do jobs first, then we'll do health, then we'll do retirement, then we'll do taxes. That's why for us, this progressive agenda is trying to address so many problems that have been shoved under the rug for so long, for decades, and now we have to untangle all of them at once. So for us, the advocates of the job guarantee of MMT, we have to recognize that as soon as we pressure candidates or politicians in office to pass a job guarantee legislation, they're going to immediately get pressure from their constituents, small business owners and others. Forget about the billionaires. Those, of course, will oppose it. But working class people who will say, you know, we can't afford this competition, would love to compete with a decent, you know, wages and benefits and so on, but we can't do it. And many of you have heard me before saying, if you can't compete, then, you know, you should be out of business. I'm talking about the big, you know, corporations and so on. But for the small business owners, it's very important to lift the burden off of their books by offering Medicare for all, so that it's not paid for by small business owners and by employees. It's paid for the same way we've been advocating for paying for universal health care and so on. So we have to be aware of that, and we have to have ready answers to push back against, you know, this can't work, this is too complicated, which means we have to consolidate our efforts to push on multiple fronts for healthcare, for education, for job guarantee, and for the higher benefits, which means organized labor, right? So I'll leave it at that.
Thank you. Liz, I see your hand. Steve, did you want to let Liz go first, or?
That's fine. That's fine.
Sure. Thank you. Liz, go ahead.
Thank you. Yes, I definitely think obviously there has to be a multi-pronged approach, but if you have to choose, and maybe this is some people will disagree, but in this moment, I would say the priority absolutely should be on organizing, and organizing in the workplace. I think the working class has to rebuild its confidence and rediscover its power, and it has been, but on higher and higher scales. We were whipped by Reagan and his injunction and PATCO, and haven't really felt that we can use our ultimate power to withhold our labor on the same scale, I think, ever since. And, you know, through using electoral politics is kind of a, it's an indirect form of power. You're relying on a politician to do what you want. Whereas in the workplace, you have the power to withhold your labor with your coworkers if you're organized to do it at any time. That's a real immense power that workers have. Big Bill Haywood said, you know, if the workers are organized, all they have to do is put their hands in their pockets and they got the capitalist class whipped. And I think we're seeing that with, you know, the teacher strike waves and healthcare strike waves, and a lot is happening, and we're starting to rebuild our confidence, but we need to organize like more than ever before, because I think average people are feeling really disenfranchised, really alienated, really powerless. You know, because, you know, nothing's been happening for us. And there really hasn't been a you know, Democrat or Republican in power putting forth bold working class policies for almost 50 years now, it feels. And so I think, winning in the workplace is one of the most empowering things that an average person can experience. They took action with the people they know, their friends and coworkers, and they got immediate results that materially benefited them in a really direct way. And that is a really special, powerful moment. And we need to do as much as we can to organize and give more workers that experience and help them activate that.
Excellent. Thank you. Steve, did you want to go?
Yeah. So, goodness, it's tough always following Fadhel. And thank you so much, Liz, for that great. That's some of the stuff I heard from Joe Burns and Sarah Nelson, those exact words. I mean, it's definitely a great starting point. So I want to take it a little differently because everybody said so many great things. And I just want to lay this out. We oftentimes talk about punching up, looking up and punching up. Sometimes punching up gives us a false sense of we've done something. It's like some phantom up there that we're like swinging at, and there's nothing there. It's laughing at us because we're marching down the wrong path. And it's like, okay, keep punching at me. You're not really hitting me though. You get it? You're not hitting me. And this comes down to a whole bunch of things within media, within the information we're consuming from the mainstream media, to the things politicians say to us, to the alternative media that avoids, like with extreme prejudice, anything about economics or MMT. And you go down this list of things, and it's going to be extremely tough to get people who should be very friendly to this idea to jump in and really fight tooth and nail for something so transformative, so necessary, because it's not interesting to them. It's just not that interesting to them. And so because that, they skip it. And so somebody with a 300,000 person platform, that's 300,000 people that aren't hearing about it from you. Somebody with 1 million of them, you might hear a minute of MMT, but the rest of it is nonstop crypto crazy stuff. Okay. So all you see from alternative media and all you see from mainstream media are like clickbait practically anymore, or foreign affairs. You don't see anyone meaningfully staying on topic, focused, driving these issues to educate people. And so what you end up with is a very cynical voting base. So the idea of voting for candidates becomes convoluted because we accept so much garbage from these candidates who are in turn twisted and tormented by what the people want. And the people haven't been educated because media and alternative media has failed to do its job in almost unbelievable ways. So I think a huge amount of this is those who know better must do better. Each one teach one right here, right now, because this is life-changing for people. This is about ending generational poverty. This is about making it so that we don't have an Uberization of society anymore, where we're not living day to day at the whims of the gig economy. We're not subsidizing bad wages at Walmart with a job guarantee because you can't steal hours that are being used in the local community. So you're not subsidizing these garbage wages. And then taking something that Fadhel said about those small businesses in the local communities. One of the things that I think needs to be thought of a lot more is the indirect value of raising all those wages up to a much higher lower wage, plus all those people that haven't received a wage, all of a sudden having access to a living wage. You talk about a huge infusion of spending power, of pent-up demand, pent-up aggregate demand that has to be executed and exacted. Now, all of a sudden, all those people that used to dream about getting a loaf of bread are out there buying a sandwich. All those people that dreamed about having a pair of shoes are suddenly riding a bicycle. So I think that those small businesses, as a result of the go large, go wide, those people will be able to in turn exact that money back into the community, because most people, especially in the lower end, they don't have the means to save. Their money comes in the door and it goes out the door immediately onto something. So I think that the small businesses end up inadvertently benefiting from the buying patterns of these individuals. So even raising the wages for a few people that work in their shop by $5 an hour, it's not going to, I think that there's a real case to be made that having your entire community have absolutely huge amount of inflow of income. I think that's a game changer. And I think that, you know, when you think about my spending is someone else's income, those poor people right now today that don't have jobs, that suddenly have jobs and healthcare and all, that's somebody else's income. So all that lifts everything up. And this is one of the very few times where you can really see right in front of your face that spending at the bottom benefits the entire economy because they spend. And these people at the bottom are not the ones that are waiting for that drip from above. They're not dealing with trickle down. They're getting spent directly on them. So I think that if politicians have courage, I think that they will take the time to learn this stuff. They won't brush it off as irrelevant. Social media, alternative media folks, please don't push this off as irrelevant. It's okay to not know these answers. Dig in. There's so much out there to learn. I'm beseeching, this is my plea to everyone, my activist friends, my folks that are running for office. Do not run away from MMT. Do not run away from a job guarantee. Learn about it, embrace it, and become a warrior to advance this. That's my statement.
Thank you. Jason, please respond. You're muted.
Sorry about that.
No problem.
It's good. Okay, I wanted to go back to something that Liz said about the how important the power of organizing is here. But you know, the reality is, and I say this is the second time candidate, somebody who, you know, sought labor endorsements. There's a lot of labor leaders who are just uneducated about the history of labor. I mean, that's their, and they are very tied to the capitalist class. You know, I say often that sometimes a union boss is just a boss. And so when we talk about organizing labor, we have to really go to the grassroots, and we have to get labor to elect better leaders. I think we have a lot of labor leaders that are not at all courageous about these particular issues. I talked about in an interview with my local labor council, and they did not endorse me. And the reason they didn't endorse me is because I brought up MMT, because I talked about federal spending and federal jobs guarantees and Medicare for all. And they thought I was out of my mind. They said, well, they started talking about inflation. And I said, well, you know, it would take too long in this interview to talk about this. But, you know, just to the point, we've really got to get labor. I mean, Sarah Nelson's fantastic. Shama Swan is fantastic. There are some really fantastic labor leaders. So a lot of really terrible labor leaders. And as diminished as the power of organized labor is, we can't afford that.
All right, great. Well said. Kiko, why don't you take the next one?
Yeah, of course. And Jason, brilliant answer, because we do need to have the power from the people and labor organizers at the grassroots level to really challenge the bosses and take on the responsibility to ensure that we need a new, better future, not for just you and I, but for the rest of the country as well. And this question is going to definitely go to the activists in the room. And organizers, Eric and Andre, what is the best route to apply pressure for a federal jobs guarantee? And can you talk about what direct actions have worked and what hasn't worked? So we'll start with Eric first.
I'm sorry, before we start, Eric, we are getting close to time here. So I kind of want to throw in our last question, which is to Liz as well. And have all of you respond to all of the questions. But Eric, Andre, and Liz, these questions are for you. Can you talk about unions and how a federal job guarantee would impact them and how we can best mobilize unions to help achieve the guarantee? So I want to hear from all of your perspectives on, you know, what you believe is the best route, direct action wise, to achieve this goal.
Absolutely. Thank you. Did you want me to go ahead, or is this directed to me or someone else?
Oh, I'm sorry. I think we were starting with Eric, and then we'll.
Okay, sorry.
Yeah.
So it sounds like there's two questions there, one from Kiko and one from Bess, different questions. Which one did you want me to? I'm asking you essentially the question is what is and what isn't working for on the ground direct actions, and what would you like to see happen going forward for the federal job guarantee? Great. I'm not sure about Andre. He's probably put together a few protests as well. Social media has splintered apart the left with all of its different groups and different platforms. And I think that we need to reassemble the left. And when people want to do actions, they're not speaking to a large enough group usually because of things like algorithms and the splintering effect that's happened to the left because of social media. So I think that the actions that we've done in the street, Yellow Vest Actions was at the Democratic National Convention in Milwaukee with our Medicare for All signs, and we were at the inauguration also. But there were small gatherings of people, and these events were intended to be large. And I think we're at a point where everyone wants to push this movement into the streets, but no one has a large enough audience to assemble the left. And so that's why I think we need to influence the influencers with MMT knowledge, and we need to stoke that outrage with the facts, with the truth, because once people do learn the truth about MMT, it's just they think they're outraged now. They're just doubly outraged once you realize some of these things. So I think that I think the small marches aren't working. It's great to meet other people and connect bridges and for future events. And if we keep small marches in perspective as to what we can try to accomplish with them, those things, building bridges and making new connections and meeting people. I think that in combination with influencing the influencers on the people with the largest followings to get these messages out, we could see some unification, some real unification there if that happens, and we could see some solutions. I'll let Liz address the labor question. That'd be great.
Well, before we get to you, Liz, would you mind if we have Andre pipe in on this one?
Yeah, I say as an organizer, just kind of some historical context of what I think personally doesn't work is I think we have to decouple, organized labor from the Democratic Party. I think the cozying up has kind of, made it hard to be adversarial to the Democratic Party, in which we don't challenge them as much as we used to. If you look back into history, then when we had our best wins was when we had an adversarial relationship with the Democratic Party, not like a buddy-buddy type relationship. So I think that's number one. We have to fix that right away. Number two, one of our big issues as well is there is a huge, serious division on the left. And I think that's for various reasons, because we're in many different groups. We have very different tactics of how we want things done. But I've put a lot of work and time in trying to build relationships with many different groups, because I really don't care about pride or who gets the victory. At the end of the day, all I care about is getting the end goal. And that's why I'm here with Real Progressives, and I work with a lot of left-wing groups. And whoever gets the win, who cares? At the end of the day, we get a win. But I think one of the things we need to do is going forward is not depend on politicians to draft legislation for us. For example, we recently passed the Medicare for All resolution in Milwaukee County, and that didn't come from the top down. And I would have you know that some of the county board members didn't even know the difference between the public option and Medicare for all. I literally had to sit down with them and explain the difference between public option and Medicare for all. So we can't depend on elected officials to do what we know is best for us. We have to get on the ground, make those phone calls, set up meetings, and literally be advocates for the policies we want to see implemented. It has to be a bottom-up approach. It can't be a top-down approach. Now, what Bernie did was amazing by actually putting Medicare for all kind of on the national platform, but we have to take it a step further. We have to make it local, because so many people don't understand how connected Medicare for all is to your local lives, your everyday lives. And we need to have those peer-to-peer conversations and the grassroots conversations. And I think that's what we have to do in order, in the same manner for jobs guarantee. It has to be that kind of same bottom-up approach. And I think that's how we get the win. And it's possible. It's probably a lot more work because you don't have like a national platform. You're not going to get attention from CNN or anything like that. But it takes time, and with every movement, with time and effort and passion, it can be done.
Oops. Excellent. Well said. Liz, can you tell us about what unions can do for us?
Well, Andre just took the words out of my mouth in terms of, connecting jobs guarantee and anything we want to do with the people we're talking to, people in our communities, having those grassroots conversations. Offline conversations oftentimes are more important than the ones we're having online. There's a person there, there's a sense of trust built. But for what unions can, is the question what unions can do to forward a job guarantee, or what's the question again? Can you remind me?
Tell us how unions can help in the fight for the job guarantee, and if they would be impacted either positively or negatively by it.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I think, I definitely agree with what Jason and Stephen and others identified earlier, is that the organized labor and unions are not all on the same page. And unfortunately, there are a lot of labor leaders who are narrowly focused on the members of their trade and are, for whatever reason, because they're captured by the capitalist class or lack of imagination, I'm not sure, tied to the Democratic Party, can't advocate or won't advocate for bold programs like a job guarantee or sometimes even Medicare for all. And so I think actually labor reform slates and caucuses are really important for union members to take on if they want to win the bold legislation like a jobs guarantee that we're talking about this evening. I'm part of actually a reform slate for the Vermont State Labor Council, AFL-CIO. I have a probably very familiar story for anyone who's been part of organized labor for some time. Back in 2019, we ran a united slate of 10 or so candidates that agreed on a program and a vision that included bold programs like Medicaid for All and a Green New Deal, which is a jobs guarantee is a center point of that. And that vision is actually what brought out a lot of members who already had that and want that too. These are really popular programs, right? We don't have to a degree, we don't have to make the argument really. People want this. It's just that nobody's activating and then organizing and doing the work to bring us all together as much as we should. And before we came in 2019, the Vermont State Labor Council, it wasn't an active organization. Our conventions were very poorly attended. 20 or so individuals. When we took on these exciting, bold programs that we were advocating for, the turnout changed dramatically in just a short period of time to like 100 people at our convention, for instance. And it requires a change of priorities from unions if they want to be effective in winning something like job guarantee, which would be in the interest of all workers and all union members. I think we really need to think more broadly in terms of the collective interest instead of our narrow, trade union interest. We have to think in a narrow class interest. And the interest of other oppressed groups too. We have to move away from the narrow focus.
Excellent point. Kiko?
All right, it's about that time, ladies and gentlemen, for our final question and some final thoughts from all the panelists. So this is the final question. So what's the one thing that the audience here today would like to take away from this evening, and how do you see the federal jobs guarantee progressing in the near future? So anybody with their hands raised up,
and also tell us where we can find you and follow you, and plug your stuff real quick, because I realized that I did not add that in to my introductions of you. So apologies.
Well, I'll start. The things that that the audience should take away from this conversation is that if this is new to you, this should be the beginning. And the main lesson is that none of this is going to materialize or happen unless we educate, mobilize, organize, and keep the pressure on candidates, keep the pressure on people in office, and really engage with them directly and do the work. As Andre mentioned earlier, you really have to set up the meetings and do the phone calls and draft the legislation. You have to realize that the Koch brothers have been drafting legislations for senators and Congress people for decades now. It's time for us to do this kind of work and to push back against the establishment narrative. And be ready, be prepared to answer the questions and shift the narrative, because they'll have prepackaged answers that will say, no, this can't happen. No, this is too expensive. No, this is a waste of money. No, we've tried this before. No, this is going to turn us into Venezuela. No, this is going to cause, and you have to be, educated and prepared with the right kind of resources to push back. And you don't have to be a professional economist or an organizer with 20 years worth of experience. You just have to have the right set of resources. And the good news is that there's plenty of resources. A lot of those resources are with Real Progressive's website, and so many other resources at the state level in your own district. Connect with other progressive organizations that have been doing this work and have been looking for people like you to connect and mobilize with them. So that's my main takeaway message. And in terms of where you can find me, you'll find me on social media. I think I have my Twitter handle there, but I'm happy to type in some more information in the chat. And thanks again for being here. It's a pleasure.
Great, thank you. Who's next? Steve, I'm sorry, Jason?
Yeah, so I think what I would like people to take away is the same thing that you would take away for any number of policies that we want to have implemented, Medicare for All, Green New Deal, or whatever it might be, is what is the purpose of government? I think people we have been trained for the last 70 years or so to think that the purpose of government is to ensure the profits of corporations. That is not the purpose of government. You can go to Article 1, Section 8 of the Constitution and see that the purpose of government is to provide for the general welfare. So we need to decide what that means. And part of what that means is a guarantee of employment at a good wage. That's what we need to start demanding of our officials, is to flip the narrative on what is the point of government. It is amazing to me that we have a government that is okay with so many people living in poverty. How is this possible in a supposed democracy? So I think we need to keep fighting back against that, and making sure that the message we are putting out into there is that the government we have right now is simply not doing its job at all. So my name's Jason Call, running for Congress in Washington's 2nd District. Callforcongress.com is my website, Call for Congress and all of my social media, and it has been an absolute pleasure to be here with everybody tonight. Thank you.
Thank you. Eric?
What I'd like people to take away from this is we can have nice things. People are starting to get used to the rhetoric that we just can't afford it and we can't have nice things. That's just not true. I want people to feel that they should expect more because they deserve more. we all deserve more in the richest country in the world, and we're not getting it. The money is there. It's not scarce. The money is there. We can have nice things. We need to force our representatives. We need to get outside their office windows in the streets. We need to build for that, though, and we need to take it to them, because I think that that's the only real way they feel pressure is when you're outside the window and they're trying to figure out how to get home, through all the people. I think that's where we need to get this thing to, but that's going to take a lot of educating, a lot of that. So
you're absolutely right. And is there somewhere that we can follow you?
I would definitely recommend going to realprogressives.org and follow our website, and go to Real Progressives and Real Progress in Action on Facebook and Twitter, and join us in messaging the truth so people can have clarity. Great.
Thank you. Steve?
Yeah, thanks. So first things first, I want to thank every one of the panelists. This was really, really good. I didn't know what we were going to get, and it turned out fantastic. I really want to thank everybody for bringing like this full, big, broad picture. But you asked what I would like people to take away from this. And what I want them to see is that while we're talking specifically about a federal job guarantee, a right to a job, a public option for employment right here, right now, this is, like Fadhel said, part of a larger framework. And it's important that we don't get stuck in what I like to call orphan politics, where we just suckle over to one little thing or suckle over to, this is part of a larger framework. So the funding mechanism behind the federal job guarantee is incredibly important, because it starts to steamroll into the Green New Deal, as Fadhel was saying. It rolls into more important things at a much broader level in terms of understanding when immigrants come to our country, as climate change creates climate refugees. We don't have to fear these people, because we have the means and resources as a currency issuing nation to provide for them as humanitarian and not hate our, immigrant friends. And as this climate change comes on, you're going to see mass migrations. It's very important that we know that this job guarantee is not just some, foo-foo thing for the man. This is not digging a hole, filling a hole. This is real, meaningful, changing the very definition of work. So we can bring all those folks in, and we can take care of people as long as we have the real resources. And that is what makes America a rich nation, not the pieces of paper. Those pieces of paper are created at will all the time. It's about the real productive capacity. And I hope folks will really take a moment to listen to our podcast. Eric told you about our website, but we have several podcasts that are really important. If you really want to learn about this stuff, we've invested thousands upon thousands of hours putting this stuff together. And my podcast, as you can see in my background, is Macro and Cheese. It's under our media dropdown on our website, but you can find Macro and Cheese on any one of the big platforms for podcasts. And I'd also like you to check out our other podcast, which is the new Untouchables. We're in the process of recording our second season of that. And it really points to the fraud and everything that is the Wall Street business model. And it shows how embed many of our favorite politicians and friends are in terms of making this nation very, very unequal. Socialism for the rich, rugged individualism for the poor. And I hope you'll tune into both of those. Thanks.
Great. Thank you. Who's next? Liz?
It's been a pleasure and honor to be on the panel with so many great organizers and thinkers. I would just want to echo a bit what Eric said. We can have nice things. One of my favorite quotes is from late anthropologist and anarchist David Graeber, and he said, "The ultimate hidden truth of the world is that it's something that we make and could just as easily make differently." And we heard from the great economists on this panel, how that can work and how that can happen. We know it's possible. And we also know deep, deep down that it's the right thing to do. that everyone should have the right to make a living, to make a contribution that's valued. And we have to really believe in that and never let go of that, because we can figure out a way to make this work. We can figure out a way to get everyone work with dignity. And we just have to make it happen. We are the ones who are going to do it, and we're going to have to make it happen. We are at a critical juncture with climate crisis, growing inequality, systemic racism, so many crises happening at once that demand a lot of work and attention. When the Depression happened, a lot of the crises like this were happening too. The Dust Bowl was a huge environmental crisis. And so the government invested a lot of flood control and agricultural work and conservation corps to try to restore that. And we can do it again. We've met moments of crisis before and have made something happen. They've been imperfect and incomplete. Let's finish this project. Let's make a jobs guarantee. And yes, realize it's part of a broader democratic socialist framework that, kicks ass for the working class, if I may say.
Excellent. Well said. And real quick, Liz, where can we follow you?
Yes, sorry. I'm on Twitter. I'll drop my Twitter handle in the chat. And also, if you want to check out the Vermont State Labor Council's 10-point program and what we're all about, I'll drop our website in there too.
Great. And last but certainly not least, Andre.
Yeah, I'm just really happy to be on this panel. The amazing thing about this panel is that there's a lot of passionate people who actually care about the issues and aren't looking to just, further their career or specific, resume. And I think in order to have a movement that's truly for and by the people, you can't really have too much pride or have a specific agenda, and you have to really be about the people. And I see that in every one of these panelists here, which makes me pretty proud about being on this panel. Overall, the thing I would say to stay involved is everything counts. When I first started getting involved in politics, I always wondered, does my voice matter, or, how can I even make an impact? And it started very small. I was just making phone calls once a week to legislators about, getting money out of politics. And from there, I'm, full-time organizer and getting resolutions passed and building up local chapters. You just have to have the passion. I didn't go to school for political science. I'm not like some political genius or anything like that. You just have to have the passion. So every voice, every call, every little thing matters when it comes to advocating for progressive policy. So it's all about the collective. If we all, let's say, donate $5 to a progressive candidate like Josh Call, that guy's going to be bankrolled because it's bankrolled by thousands and thousands of people who care about the political system. So we just have to, put our pride aside, put away any personal agendas, and continue the movement for the sake of the future of this nation. I put my information in the chat, but I'll put it down there again just so we can stay connected. I'm pretty active on Twitter, so you can hit me up there. But yeah, I'm really excited to be a part of this panel and looking forward to working with this group of people again in the near future.
Thank you so much, Andre, and thank you to everyone who's joining us. This has been a really excellent discussion, and don't go away because we are going to be taking questions from the audience. We have several VIP members coming to ask questions on camera, and then if there's time, we will get to some questions that were put in the Q&A chat as well. So first on the list, Joy Marie, are you with us? And can you come on and ask your question?
Can you guys hear me?
Yes. Now, there we go.
Let me see if I can get my mug up. Yes, there I am. Okay. So thank you guys so much. This has been an incredible show. Hey, everyone. It's so good to see you, Steve, Fadhel, Kiko, everyone. This is rad. So, a lot of you guys know my story. Last year, I started going blind. I lost 85% of my sight. I lost my job, which was completely legal. So federal job guarantee would just change my life. And I thank you guys so much for bringing up disabled people, because a lot of times people don't realize that would, a federal job guarantee would help ex-prisoners, disabled, homeless people, etc. So I'm going to take it on a different note, because you guys kept answering the questions I had. So I kept coming up with new ones. So a lot of people seem concerned that with a federal job guarantee, you would not be able to make a living as a musician, an artist, things like this, which we know to be untrue. But can you guys actually touch on that and kind of expand to kind of ensure people that they would actually be better off?
And before we answer that question, do you want to just give a shout out to your podcast?
Oh yeah. So I'm currently with Roar Media Live. If you go to YouTube and just type in Savage Joy, there's like over 400 shows. And I'm currently co-organizing 15 Medicare for All marches across the country, and we're adding more. They're all July 24th, and RP is kind enough to help us film some of the locations. Oh, so you can find that at M4, the number 4, M4M4 ALL on Twitter.
Great, thanks. So who wanted to take a crack at the question? Was it Liz?
A bunch of us raised our hands, but I would like to as well.
Okay, Steve?
Yeah, so I just interviewed Bill Mitchell, who's one of the original gangsters of the MMT development team. And a lot of times he's often accredited as being one of the granddaddies of the federal job guarantee. And one of the things that Bill often talks about is, hey, man, we can fund surfers. Surfers can go out there and surf, but they can also collect water samples while they're out there. And they can also teach water safety courses at the local elementary schools or whatever. So there's a bunch of ways to craft. The idea here, and this is what I love about the federal job guarantee, is these aren't jobs, now mind you, let me be crystal clear. A job guarantee to be enacted would be legislation, which means that politicians are going to debate the subject. People that don't understand what we're trying to accomplish, people that do, and people that don't want us to accomplish what we're trying to accomplish, right? So all these voices are going to be in there. But a job guarantee, as someone like myself would be advocating for, would literally redefine work. And that would include allowing artists to earn a wage. And all the details of that could be worked out in the local community. I'd like to be able to see caregivers get opportunity for a job guarantee, musicians, all the above. But there is a very important connectedness that the job guarantee does, because, as leftists, we don't like capital taking from our labor, stealing from our labor, and we want to value labor. And so the job guarantee not only changes what defines work, but it also values labor, makes us have the labor standard. So any of these jobs that the local community values, and this is why I said earlier that it's a democracy enhancer, because people, when they show up to talk about what jobs they would want to compensate, this is the opportunity to make those sorts of things known. And so in my perfect job guarantee scenario, I know Pavlina has a nonprofit angle at these things. I know there's other ways of looking at this. But I would like to be able to see every one of those kinds of personal pursuits that people find that don't fit neatly into a normal 9-to-5 type job. I want to see those compensated under a job guarantee program. I'd like to see us start embracing a broader definition of what benefits the community instead of just whether it makes profit for the man. I want us to start thinking about, and definitely music, poetry, working with the elderly, taking care of all these things add social value to the community. So I think that that's a good way of looking at what a job guarantee could do. And I think that to your question, though, it really does come down to how the bill is written. And it also comes down to how the community values each of those endeavors.
Okay, great. Does anyone else want to chime in on that? Yeah, Liz?
I have to, because this is one of the most exciting aspects for me. I actually got into the whole labor movement as an artist myself. And so thank you for asking this question, Joy. I wanted to change the world with art, and I do still believe in that as well. I want to say that the arts have been really one of the most well-remembered and venerated aspects of the WPA. And it maybe, it's a long time ago, so maybe, there's not as much appreciation anymore about the scope of that and the amount of investment the US government made in the arts. But we had the Federal Writers Project, we had the Federal Music Project, we had the Federal Art Project. And these were artists were being paid to make art all over the country. And it wasn't even just in like the, mega metropolitan cultural centers. It was in rural America as well. People who hadn't had the chance to enjoy the arts, go to see a play before, poor farmers had the opportunity to, enjoy excellent artwork. And it makes sense that a job guarantee would promote the arts and fund the arts too. There's a reason why they, did this. The FDR and those who are on the board for the New Deal, from the beginning, were fighting the business community over the New Deal. The business community was dragged through, having to pay for these projects and being taxed for these projects, and the public was receiving all kinds of propaganda from that community as well. And what better way to show how transformative the New Deal is than to have art all over, a renaissance of art, of art that shows everyday people and talks about everyday people's lives on a way that art hasn't really been done before, like, in post offices and everywhere. WPA on all this beautiful art all across the country. It's a great way to market and show how transformative and important and special the program is. So I think it definitely should have a role in any kind of job guarantee.
Excellent. And I'm an artist as well, so I would absolutely identify with that. Great. Thank you so much, Joy. And we're going to move on to the next question, but we're so grateful to have you. Thank you so much.
Much love, everyone.
Thanks. And if we could just get you to turn off the... Yeah, great, perfect. Okay, so then our next questioner is James Fauntleroy from the JB Show on Fred Hampton Leftist Network. Welcome, James.
Good evening. Nice to meet you all.
Nice to meet you as well.
So as far as my question goes, it's been largely answered for the most part. So I had to shift it just a little bit. But if you would like to follow me, you can follow me at JBFaunt. That's JAYBEFAUNT. And you can also follow us on Fred Hampton Left on Twitter. And you can go to the Fred Hampton Leftist podcast or Fred Hampton Network on YouTube. My question is for the general panelists. And here it goes. So in Dr. Stephanie Kelton's book, The Deficit Myth, she explained how a federal job guarantee, which includes modern monetary theory, will require deficit spending as a currency issuer, is one of the best ways to increase the minimum wage in the country by setting a federal job wages to a living wage, which would force private companies to have to raise their wages in order to compete for workers. Now, here's the question. Do you agree with this reasoning, which you guys largely do, I think? But what wage should be set for workers in the federal jobs guarantee? Because we all know that $15 in many places just doesn't cut it.
Excellent question. Who would like to take this one? Fadhel?
Yeah, I can take this one. Thank you for the question. Many of you have heard me before refer people to the living wage database, the MIT living wage database, which actually reflects the actual cost of living county by county across the country. $15 an hour plus benefits, maybe 10 years ago, right? So that's number one. Number two, we need to address, as I said earlier, the healthcare cost. So Medicare for all has to be on the table alongside with a job guarantee with living wages. Childcare, transportation, all of these things, especially in rural parts of the country, we know that $15 an hour plus the basic benefits will not cut it. But then I would like to add something else, which is, again, extremely important in rural parts of the country, in the most neglected parts of the country, which is the following. And I've had this conversation with people who would actually immediately benefit from a job guarantee. They say the following. They say, great, $15 an hour is great, and it's a job guarantee, and I can take it immediately. But will there be any resources for me because I'm struggling with an addiction, or I've lost my my housing, or I've just came out of prison and I have no skills? Are you setting me up to fail? Are you saying this is a job guarantee, show up at 9 o'clock, $15 an hour? What if I can't actually stick on the job because of a physical condition, mental health condition, or an addiction? So we need the wraparound services to actually lift people up, not just set them up to fail. So that's why the job guarantee is a subcomponent of the bigger platform, which is the Green New Deal, that includes health, includes education. That's why we argue for housing for all. That's why we argue for public transportation. So this is long overdue investments. So I know you asked the specific question, which is a very important question, but it opens that can of worms that I talked about earlier that we can't ignore. So we have to be ready to broaden the conversation and argue for all of those things, and then talk about why we can actually afford all of those things at the same time. When they say, oh, we couldn't even afford the job guarantee, how are we going to afford all of this stuff? This is where MMT becomes critical for the progressive movement. So yes, we can afford a job guarantee. Yes, we can make it competitive for small businesses and others. And yes, we can make it a living wage if we also add all of these critical components to our platforms. But if we keep it narrow, just do $15 an hour and maybe some benefits, and say, let's shove all the other stuff under the rug like we did for the last 40 years, then we're not being honest with the people we're trying to uplift, and we're not being truthful to what the potential is, what the possibilities are. So that's how I would frame it. I would use this as a segue into a broader conversation, and then demonstrate that from an MMT perspective, a federal government can afford all of the progressive agenda, and it doesn't have to be necessarily tied to taxing the rich or taxing oil companies or taxing Wall Street. Decoupling, right? Decouple the spending on the national priorities from the taxing of all of those things. So tax the rich to reduce inequality, tax Wall Street to reduce speculation, tax pollution out of existence, not because we need their money or their permission for a living wage or for healthcare and so on. So both are important. Once we kind of lift this veil from that the establishment has been forcing us under to believe that we need to tax this to get healthcare, or get a permission from Wall Street in order to have a green economy and all that, then our pitchforks are sharp and ready to tackle all the big challenges. Then we can tax the rich, we can reduce inequality, and we can have all the nice things that Eric talked about earlier.
Great. Jason, would you like to jump on this? Oh, I'm
yeah,
sorry.
good to see you, Jay. Thank you for the question. I want to throw another little bit of an angle out here also, is that I'll say, first of all, I think I'm one of the very, very few candidates who is openly advocating for a $25 minimum wage right now. $15 is not enough, and in some areas $25 is not enough. But I think that may be a big, if we're talking about a 40-hour work week, which is what I wanted to say is if we have a federal jobs guarantee and we have the opportunity to put everybody to work, we don't necessarily have to have a quote unquote hourly wage. We should simply have a living income for that work. Moving to automation and a wider labor pool. There's no reason that we could then move to, and I think this is something with our, American workers are extremely productive. I mean, we're the most productive workers on the planet. We just don't get to reap the fruits of our own labor. So if we are looking at that productivity and that there's a lot of work that needs to be done, that there's no reason that we couldn't have a 28-hour work week. I'd written in the chat a little while ago, visualize a 28-hour work week, because American workers are overworked and they're underpaid. Why not balance that out? When we're talking about what is quality of life, and what we're really moving towards here is what is quality of life for everybody. A 40-hour work week, that's a lot. And for some jobs, it's really a lot. So why not spread that out and say, okay, if this particular job only requires that you be there for 25 hours a week, 28 hours a week, that can still be a living income. So even just tying it to that hourly wage may not even be the right way to approach it. It's what is a living income for for whatever work it is that you're doing. I would like us to have more leisure time.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much for joining us, James. It was really great to have you, and we hope to see you soon. And the next person that
thank you all, everyone.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you so much. The next person is Meg McPherson from the Nerdolitics podcast on the Fred Hampton Leftist Network. So Meg, come on up and ask your question.
Hey guys, it's so nice to see everyone. Yes, my name is Megan McPherson. I am the co-host of the Nerdolitics podcast at Fred Hampton Leftist, along with James Fauntleroy, who's also a Fred Hampton Leftist. It's good to see you, JB. And also the upcoming Killjoy Guide podcast that should be launching next month, I hope. So my question, because I come from Florida, which is a right to work state, and I live in a very rural area, which right in the middle of Trump country. So my question is, how do we organize in rural red areas for a federal jobs guarantee? And do you believe that a general strike is a good direction to go in order to get goals like the federal jobs guarantee done?
Okay, great. So who would like to take this one? Andre?
Yeah, thanks for asking that question, and thanks for coming on and listening to us talk. I also live in a right to work state, Wisconsin, and I also live in a very rural community. And so I think the first thing we have to do, and I'm not saying you do, I'm just talking about organizing in general, is to not think as right wingers or Trumpers or red areas as different than any other place where there is labor, because they have the same needs and wants that we do. They just want to make a living so that they can take care of their family. So what I do organizing is you just got to start with having conversations with people on a base level and not try to bring politics into it. Just kind of get to know them personally, because when you kind of get past the person or the politics, it's very easy to talk to people. And I've had conversations with Trumpers who are just like, yeah, man, we need, like, they like Medicare for all, they like $15 minimum wage. They just, when you get to that cultural stuff, it gets kind of weird. But yeah, you got to have those like peer-to-peer conversations. And if you're talking about expanding that that organizing effort, one of the things we do here in Sheboygan is we do house meetings. So for example, obviously it's COVID right now, so we're a little bit hesitant about like in-person house meetings. But for example, say somebody in a rural area, who has good connections in the rural area and has friends and families. Ask them to invite 10 to 15 friends and family to come join for a conversation to talk about politics. Obviously, you don't want to start with politics, but you kind of lead into it after you kind of, make them feel comfortable. And you'll be surprised at some of the answers you get. A lot of them are very populist in their economic sense of how they look at the economy. So I say you got to start kind of small, but just I think what's really important is not going in with any biases or not getting into the culture war. Because as soon as you start talking about like abortion or something like that, it's cut off. It's game over. But when you find those common grounds on economic issues, you'll be surprised how like easy they are to talk to. But that's just kind of my experience. But yeah, I do live in a similar process as you because I live in a rural area and also a right to work state. So I have a little similar experience to you as well.
Thank you, Andre.
No problem.
Great. Fadhel, quickly.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks, Meg, for joining us and for the question. So do you guys remember that Fox News town hall that Bernie did on Medicare for All, that deprogramming that he did in 45 minutes? That's what we need to do, as Andre talked about, 10 to 15 people at a time in your communities. And we know this for a fact because especially in this part of the country, I'm in Ohio and Appalachia, when Bernie and Trump showed up here in 2015, 2016, they pinched a nerve, and that nerve is still raw. And because people were just looking for different answers, finally you have candidates who came in and said, we feel your pain, we know your economic anxiety, and we have solutions. Of course, the solutions were very different, the Bernie narrative and the Trump narrative. So those economic anxieties are still there, and they're very, very similar. Some gravitate towards the QAnon view of the world and conspiracy theories and all of that. And others are more grounded into practical organizing solutions and so on. But you're not going to deprogram that by going on CNN and making the big speech announcements and all that. It has to be at the community level, which makes our work even more important than ever before. Finally, the one thing I want to say here is the job guarantee in particular is the most important, the most popular jobs program in the country. And maybe somebody can drop the polling numbers in the chat. And this is not just for Democrats. This is for Democrats, Republicans, Independents. It's a no-brainer. The only opposition you get to it eventually is from people who say, oh, this job guarantee is going to be really ambitious and it's going to be very expensive. How are we going to pay for it? And then the dominant narrative comes in and says, oh, we're going to tax corporations to pay for it. Then that means that my livelihood is on the line because that corporation will outsource my jobs, right? So that's where we need to jump in with the correct narrative that says, this is how we're going to pay for it. This is why this is actually going to save us money because we're paying for it many times over, as I said earlier, with money, blood, and tears. So getting our side of the spectrum organized and mobilized and educated is extremely important because the fertile ground is there. The people want it from the left, from the center, from the right. It's just fine-tuning how we're going to pay for it, how we're going to coordinate this with the cost of health, with the cost of insurance, and all of that. That's where we need to organize for this final push.
Absolutely. Steve, quickly.
Yeah, so great question. And, I'm a former Republican, lifelong Republican, grew up in a Reagan household, voted for W twice, right? But I speak fluent right wing. I understand that language because that's the language of my family. That's where I grew up. Now I am a radicalized leftist, MMT informed leftist. And, so one of the big things as a former Republican was the whole concept of taxes. And you're just going to raise my taxes to pay for your bad decisions, right? These are common themes that you hear in every one of these groups. When you understand MMT, and regardless of uninformed fellow leftists saying, oh, you're a libertarian or some nonsense, when you speak fluent MMT, you understand that, hey, you know what? good news, your taxes don't have to go up to pay for this. Isn't that wonderful? Your taxes literally don't pay for this program. And so you can talk about that. There's an entry point there to talk to them. The other thing that's important is that Republicans in general have this really old-fashioned, bootstrapped, hard work mindset. And so the job guarantee, while it's not feeding the man in the way that they typically think, it still says, well, you know, people be working hard for their work. You know, they'll be working for this money. And so this job here is an opportunity to you know, for them to pay back to the community kind of thing. So there's an angle there for even them. If they, even if you don't agree with their sensibilities, the idea here though is that we're trying to win, and they hate corruption. They hate people getting over on the system and so forth. Job guarantee is for everybody. It's for whites, blacks, gays, straight, everybody. There's nobody that's left out of this. Prison, non-prison, you name it. So I think there's a fairness that appeals to Republicans. Their Make America Great Again mindset harkens back to a time when everybody had jobs and people were coaching the baseball team and the kids were bounced on the knee over apple pie. So I think there's a little bit of that you can weave, but see, for once it's intersectional. We're not leaving anyone out. Now it's everyone. So I think that's an opportunity as a former right winger to make your case.
Excellent point.
Thank you. Thanks, Stephen.
Thank you so much, Meg. It was great to see you, and hopefully we'll see you again soon.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you. Next, we have Sam Carliner from News Dive Radio and Left Voice. Come on up, Sam, if you're still with us.
He dropped off just about 20 seconds ago.
Oh, unfortunate. Oh, that's unfortunate. Okay. Well, let's move forward then to Jackie Poles, who's the other co-host of Nerdolitics on the Fred Hampton Leftist Network, as well as a number of other shows on that network. And John?
Hi, this is Jackie from Fred Hampton Leftist. Unfortunately, I wasn't able to attend today, so I pre-recorded this. Apologies if my question has already been addressed. But my question is, do you think that the federal jobs guarantee would hinder other progressive policies such as a UBI or Medicare for all?
It's a great question. Well, we've talked a lot about Medicare for all, but who would like to take on the UBI question? Steve?
Yeah, so I see a UBI very, very differently. I do not see it as a leftist program. Going back to Milton Friedman and the neoliberal, group of economists that were trying to peel away and destroy the New Deal. The UBI has always been a libertarian approach to dismantling all the social safety nets, all the programs, you name it. The UBI also has a few other very important things that make it not beneficial. It's status quo. And one of them is that I can't eat a piece of paper. I can't eat $1, but I can eat food. I can't live under $1, but I can live under a roof of a house. I can't drive $1 to work or to the store or to the doctor. I have to take a car or transportation. So these are things that when you talk about guaranteeing, I look at basic needs guarantees as something that matters to me. I want rights to public space, rights to internet and broadband, rights to communication, rights to food, rights to medical help. I don't want pieces of paper. And so what ends up happening is when you give pieces of paper to people, bad actors like Walmart and Uber and others predate on that. And they literally subsidize poor wages. They all the benefits you just heard about a federal job guarantee are literally undermined by a UBI, U being universal unconditional basic income. Right here, right now, I started today's talk off talking about how we already have a basic income in Social Security. It already exists. We could expand it. We can change the parameters. It already serves survivor benefits, disability. It hosts a host of other things that could be done. So if you're looking at, for whatever reason, people not wanting to work or whatever, the job guarantee is not a you don't work kind of thing, but it is redefining work. So I find that most people that talk about wanting a UBI always come back with something they'd like to do, like an artist or a musician or whatever. And in those cases, we already said that would be covered by a job guarantee. But over here on the other side of that, the problem with the UBI also is it turns people into consumption units. They're not getting any training for that. And it opens the door wide open for the right wing in this country, and not just the right wing, the center people, the centrists, the establishment Democrats, huge swath of people who desire to eliminate the New Deal infrastructure, all these programs we've been talking about, how important is the Green New Deal, they eliminate that and then ultimately say, here's your check, shut up and go eat your peas. Oh, what do you mean you couldn't afford health care? What do you mean you couldn't afford housing? What do you mean you couldn't afford transportation? I gave you $1,000. Why didn't you spend it right? Why didn't you do better? And so to me, a UBI is one of the worst policies out there. I understand why people want it or even think about it. But when you can give somebody who is broke and poor a guaranteed job with benefits and everything, not only do you substantially change their life, but you also provide the community with value, social value. And
Yes,
I think that
excellent.
It's very important. Yep.
Excellent. Yes, Fadhel, quickly, and then we have one more question we need to get to before we wrap up tonight.
And also Liz wanted to say something.
I'm so sorry, Liz, I didn't see you. But yes, okay.
Very brief. And I'll bring in the Medicare for All question here that was asked. So from an MMT perspective, understanding that the US federal government has this massive spending capacity that's not being directed in the right direction, this is what we should be fighting for as a progressive movement. 3 layers. The first layer is what we call universal public services. That includes health for all, education, housing, all the services, universal services, childcare that we've been talking about. Number 2, once we provide the basic services, universal basic services, a job guarantee for people who want to work at decent wages and benefits, the way we've been talking about it today. And especially when we're facing all of these crises, especially the climate crisis, the neglect crises that we're dealing with for the elderly, for children, and for different communities. I mean, I can't sit here and tell you that we have millions of people who want to work, all of this work that needs to be done, but we're not going to do anything about it. We're going to give everybody a universal basic income. That's just not acceptable. So universal public services, a job guarantee at decent wages and benefits for people who want to work. And then the third layer is a generous income support system for people who can't work or shouldn't work for health reasons and so on. So we're guaranteeing that nobody's left behind. But if we ignore all of this and say we're only going to fight for a universal basic income, that's the 100% Milton Friedman, Silicon Valley Trojan horse for the right-wing agenda. Why? Because they want to give everybody a little bit of peanuts, $1,000 a month, and then they're going to remove all of your services, the infrastructure that Steve was talking about earlier. And they want to make sure that everybody's now is going to hustle for work in the gig economy with no benefits, no contracts, no protections, so that you can feed your family. So let's be very careful when we see the attraction. We see a lot of people on the left going for a universal basic income because it sounds like a good idea, right? We're giving people income, but you're losing track of the big picture. So let's reunite. Let's make sure that we're fighting for all of these comprehensive pieces in one big push. And that's why, as I said earlier, the Green New Deal is this platform that has all of these layers at the same time.
Absolutely. Couldn't be more important. Liz?
Well, Fadhel and Stephen covered much of what I had said very well. But, with universal basic income, I do largely agree. On the other hand, I can understand some of the appeal from those on the left insofar as it has been a way to recognize a lot of the unpaid labor that is largely performed by women, right? Such as domestic work, in household, caring for children, parents, other family members. And I think that does need to be recognized somehow. I'm not sure the best way to do it. I don't think a UBI is a solution on its own for all the reasons that Stephen and Fadhel so brilliantly laid out. And I'd also say, it's so important for workers to have participation in the economy. Democracy is more than going and voting. Democracy is also having a role and a voice in the production and reproduction of society. And to go with the UBI and say, we're going to just trade a universal basic income for automation and maybe mass unemployment potentially, is really disempowering. I think would be disempowering for masses of working people. So I think we have to be very careful about trading away our economic power as well as workers.
Excellent point. Thank you. Okay, our next question is from Awkward, who is a musician and activist with 10 Demands.
Peace, this is Awkward. I'm an original member of Our United Left, co-founder of 10 Demands, hip-hop artist, and lifelong anti-racist, anti-fascist activist and organizer. You probably know me from my music or my abolition work, but lately I've been trying to organize a growing group of people interested in discussing the feasibility of a general strike. And so my question to you today, knowing what we know about the feasibility of a general strike at this point, is how would a federal jobs guarantee impact that call for a general strike? And if we were still in need of a general strike because a federal jobs guarantee does not guarantee some other essentials, how important do you think mutual aid is, a national network of mutual aid organizations to enable us to commit to this safely? And also, from your backgrounds, what do you think should be the methodology for determining what our demands are, as well as disseminating those demands, so we can at least threaten the power holders with a general strike and try to reach our goals? Thank you so much.
Okay, great. That was a large question. Anyone want to take a swing? How about some of our organizers? Eric, would you like to say something? Andre, Liz, did you have your hand up? No?
I'm still digesting. Hopefully a second.
Well, if nobody's ready, I'm happy to say a few words.
Sure.
So I think this is probably, I'm talking about the next 3 months, is probably the best time in US history to push for a general strike for the following reasons. We're going to observe in the next few weeks, over the next 2 to 3 months, starting in a couple of weeks, about half the states in this country are going to get rid of the unemployment benefits that came with the COVID relief package. And everybody's been listening to these nonsensical debates about workers that are staying home because the government is paying them too much in unemployment compensation, and they don't want to go back to work. And nobody's talking about that their jobs are, abusive, underpaying, provide no benefits. It makes perfect sense, right, for people to, stick around at home during a crisis and not to go back to an abusive relationship with employers. We're talking about, the majority of low-paid jobs. We're talking about 40 million jobs in this category. Nobody's talking about the alternative, because during the COVID relief, the federal government is essentially paying $15 an hour, right? With no benefits. And we can afford it. We didn't cause hyperinflation. We didn't bankrupt the country. And we've kept people safe, right? Think of this as the ultimate job guarantee, where you're guaranteed a job, paid a decent wage, $15 an hour, and you're doing the most valuable work during a pandemic, which is staying safe, staying home, right? We've demonstrated this for the last 12 months. Now let's transition workers back into a workplace environment where they can build communities from within, where they can earn decent wages and provide services that have been undersupplied by the private sector, completely not provided by the private sector. And this is the time to dig in our heels and say, we demand a federal job guarantee. We don't want to go back to this abusive, extractive system. So I think this is a one-in-a-lifetime opportunity for the labor movement, for those who are working in the labor movement, to unite with those who are not working, those who are unemployed, and those who have been forced out of the labor force for a variety of reasons, to form a united front and demand better workplace conditions, better pay, better benefits from the private sector, if not from the federal government, as in the form of a job guarantee.
Oops, excellent. Jason, next.
Yeah. So general strike is as an activist, as somebody who has been a union worker for a long time, I was a high school teacher for almost 20 years, have been on strike actions and understand the power of a strike. A general strike is so expansive at this point that it is going to require sheer desperation. And so I think it's really important what Fadhel brought up here about what's going to happen in coming months as these unemployment benefits expire. We are going to see, and it's a terrible thing, here in a democracy, in the wealthiest country in the world, it's a terrible thing that we would get to such desperation that we would need a general strike. But it is something we have to start considering. It is going to take a lot of organization, a lot of solidarity. One of the things that I really fear about starting towards a general strike is the fact that the left tends to be so split over some minor things, where we really have to start considering the bigger picture of how we can not get distracted by a lot of petty fights. And I think once we can do that and figure out what the goal of the general strike is, I definitely think it's something that we need to move towards. It's going to take an immense amount of organizing. Like when we start talking about it seriously, we can't treat it lightly at all, because it is going to have wide-reaching impacts on everybody. Awkward brought up mutual aid. We are going to have some mutual aid systems in place if we are going to have a successful general strike. So how are we going to do that? But I just want to say in general, and I say this as a candidate, and something that as we move towards that, it may be something that I as a candidate will start talking about, using my platform to promote. I'm for it. I want to say I'm for it, and I think that it may be the only way that we can get some of the things that we need.
Andre?
Yeah, I think one of the biggest fights that we have to confront before we pass any progressive legislation is the corruption of money in politics. And until we actually address that and truly tackle that, we got to be honest with ourselves. There will be no true traction on progressive policies. That's why we don't see any traction on the $15 minimum wage, healthcare, climate change policies. Anything we actually care about, there's no traction, is because of corruption of money in politics. So I think if we're going to have a general strike, that has to be one of the main demands in a general strike, because as long as we let the wealthy corrupt our political system, there will never be any true representation for the regular people. So that's all I have to say about that. But yeah, we have to address that.
Well said. Liz? And then Steve?
Yeah, so a lot of what I'm going to say has been said, but I would be remiss to not mention that the Vermont State Labor Council is currently under investigation by the AFL-CIO, by Richard Trumka, for daring to discuss a general strike in the lead up to the potential coup threats that were somewhat founded, as with January 6th and everything that happened with the insurrection at the Capitol. So there's a real fear within organized labor, within workers, of using these very powerful tools, and it's the result of decades of suppression of worker power. Taft-Hartley outlawing solidarity strikes, and just a lot of education and agitation needs to happen. And I think ultimately, as Jason said, it's going to not really be in our control so much in terms of an economic general strike, because it's really going to depend on just the confluence of historical contingencies, some of which Fadhel, said and detailed that will be coming up, and potentially could foment the kind of desperation, as Jason identified, that would lead to a general strike. In the meantime, we have to prepare for that, because it is a really powerful and important tool that we will ultimately need to, change things around, because things have gotten so bad in this country. But we need to push against those in the organized left and labor leaders who, are essentially putting down leftists and socialists and other, leftists who you just want to talk about it and really be courageous and saying, this is something that we have the right to do, and that we may have to do in a desperate situation to get people what they need to survive. So, I said solidarity again is really important. We can't let forces divide and conquer us and we have to just continue to doing lots of organizing.
So,
Great.
one of the
Thank you, Steve.
One of the things that jumped out at me a while back, I started interviewing labor organizers on Macro and Cheese, and I started with a guy named T. Chef Reisberg, and I went to Joe Burns, who is one of the lead labor lawyers at the airlines attendant union, and I spoke to Sarah Nelson as well. And one of the things that came in particular from Joe was the idea that the Eugene V. Debs version of the labor force and concept of strikes has changed. We have a global look. We have very few union floors where we can just all meet in the cafeteria or whatever and just walk out of the building at the same time. Many of us work remotely. And so what he talked about was some of the more important labor forces out there that directly impact our ability to move product around the country, that directly impacts capital's bottom line. Things like, the longshoremen, people like the trucking, union truckers, and so forth, and various parts of the railroad industry, anything that moves things to and from, that gets product around, that breaks the supply chain. And these are the sorts of things that he said would have the most impact. I think, unfortunately, we are not right now anyway. I don't believe we have enough mutual aid set up to actually take on a general strike. I think a lot of work needs to be done to make sure people are taken care of and healthy and whole and fed, should they go without paychecks to do something like this. And this goes to strike mindedness anyway. I was a strike captain at the local CWA 2222 at Bell Atlantic years ago. And one of the things that happened was the strike pay was so small that unless you had a bunch of money saved in the bank, chances are you were going to be a scab. You were going to cross the line and you were going to go to work. And that creates obviously a lot of pain and suffering long-term for that person's career. But the fact that there isn't a lot of money to cover for families and houses and stuff, it limits the willingness for people to stay out long-term. And so I think that these are very important questions, very important organizing questions that can't just be sloughed off because somebody wants this to happen so badly. And I find a lot of groups that when they hear things that interfere with their dream, they push it away. But these are the very core things that no matter what, no matter how badly we need one, you've got to make sure that those individuals are taken care of, whether that be legal support, whether that be food, shelter, transportation, whatever it takes. There needs to be a true, honest to goodness mutual aid network and communications network, because they can cut us off right now as it is. So that's my take.
Absolutely. That's vital. That's vital. Eric, did you want to say anything quickly before we wrap up?
Sure. I'm all for a general strike, but a lot of preparation and support structure needs to be assembled for something big like that to be pulled off. But indeed, I do think we need to go there. And just like Bernie said, that every movement, every major movement of the past, whether it was the women's movement or gay rights or civil rights, those movements were catalyzed by activists in the street. Mass protests, and we're all feeling a lot of frustration with electoral politics. And I'm going to appeal to everybody that's listening that we really need to also focus on non-electoral solutions and strikes, protests. We have to be all about these things, and we need to prepare ourselves to do this. So. That's going to take a big support structure. I'm all for a general strike. I don't think we're at that quite yet as far as the organization goes, but I think that the people want it. I think that that's the direction that we're headed, and it just means a lot more getting together, a lot more truth, and sharing things like MMT, that help people focus on the real problems. It's not the money that's hard to come up with. It's the resources. We can always afford it. We can always pay for it at a federal.
Absolutely federally. Okay, great. Well, Kiko, why don't you wrap up, and I will wrap up after you, and then we'll be wrapped.
Sounds wrapping good. I just want to say thank you guys so much for coming to this very enlightening panel. Panelists, thank you guys so much for coming on. It's a great pleasure to hear you guys all speak about the federal jobs guarantee. More than ever, we need to be in solidarity and help one another to either mutual aid or other means necessary to, one, survive this pandemic crisis, but also two, to weather the storm that's coming, because nothing's a guarantee until we make it a guarantee. And this discussion we have here today, we want to put the word guarantee to everywhere and anywhere we can, because when we are in solidarity with one another, we are united as one. So I'll leave you at that. Bess, thank you so much for being a wonderful host. You're just the kindest person I've ever met.
Thank you so much. And thank you for being a wonderful co-host. And thank you to Real Progressives, our co-sponsors for the evening. They are having a book club on Pavlina Chernova's new job guarantee book. So if you're interested in that, please go to realprogressives.com, org. It's org. Okay, sorry. .org. Also go to unitedleft.org and sign up with us as well. And thank you so much, everyone, for coming. And of course, you are all activists in your own right. And without you, nothing we say here matters. So thank you all again for coming, and go and spread the knowledge.